fantastic supporter of AARES. You're always, frequently coming to conferences, and obviously you had a big involvement in AARES. It would have been in your earlier days. So what do you think is important about a society like AARES? Why is it worth supporting? Why do you come all this way so often?
I am, well, first of all, I always learn things, so that's interesting. I also think fundamentally, although clearly Australia is a country where, that's worked very hard to get rid of unproductive policies, shall we say. It always comes with an element of, we recognize there will be adjustment and we need to deal with the adjustment. And I find that very refreshing, and so I learn a lot of stuff that influences my teaching to a very great extent, and actually even some of the research that I do. In Canada, we will just get rid of policies. The discussion about the necessity for there to be backup. Agricultural economists, by the way, in Australia too, have always had a pretty profound policy influence. And I used to think that agriculture must be a much bigger share of the economy when you compared it to Canada. I mean, Canada was bigger population-wise, so slightly bigger economy-wise. I don't know why we're in that group of 7. I don't think we're big enough to justify being there, but it must be some political reason. But when I look back, the agriculture was more important economically in Canada. The thing that is very different in Canada, though, is the regional breakdown. And one of my favorite senior colleagues there used to say, agricultural policy will break up the country far faster, because we went through a series of referendums about cultural reasons for splitting up the country. But he said, agricultural policy is way more divisive than anything cultural. And if we do break up in the end, it'll be the West going, because they're not being recognized for their contribution to the economy. I always found that those things were handled better in Australia, and so that I could learn things that would influence policy. And no matter how much you want to get rid of policy, it's never a question of getting rid of it tomorrow and you're on your own. If we get rid of supply management, there will be some kind of government program, but it probably will be over within 6 months. I mean, not the planning that went into here about the consumer levy that would be there to cover the costs of adjustment in the dairy industry, that sort of thing. It's just that we don't seem to take that into account. When we engaged in free trade with the US, the grape industry took a 2x4 to the government, and they did get investment to pull out their baby duck vines and plant good vines that have turned into a relatively good wine industry for our climate, but not so much other sectors that were decimated by the original free trade agreement. So I find that interesting and important intellectually for my development. I also find that people are more actively engaged in research here at the senior levels in some way, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it may be a bit of an American influence, but it seems like when you get to be a really senior person in Canada, you often drift off to running your own consulting shop or doing those sorts of things, and perhaps not contributing quite as intellectually to the profession and to the growth of the young people and all of that sort of stuff. This is not true on the resource economics side, by the way. This is very much an agricultural, and for a long time the resource economists didn't belong to the Ag Econ Society. They said, we're not ag economists, why should we? And that, I know that there's always those argy-bargy things in our profession, but it seems like Australia's been able to bridge that more successfully than we have. Although, my colleagues at Alberta have done a lot to try and get rid of that distance. Vic is wonderful, Peter's wonderful, but there was a pretty big distance for many, many, many years. And I don't think even Vic went to the Ag Econ Society meetings regularly. as often as he would go to other meetings. So those things are kind of interesting. Obviously, it's because I know people that I like here, but it's more about, when Will Martin comes back, and the ties people have to Australia don't dissipate when they go to live somewhere else in some senses. And they bring that intellectual engagement from other places in a way I find pretty appealing. Julian's another one who's incredibly loyal to coming back here and doing good things, creating that North American Australian Ag Econ Society, or Australasian Ag and Resource Econ Society connection was, I think, brilliant for bringing people over here. By the way, I will say that my Canadian colleagues who come here also comment on the fact that the meetings are better than our Canadian meetings are. So there's something different about it. Lots of my Canadian colleagues pretty smart, very capable people, always happy to have an invite to AARES. So it's interesting. I love some of the things like I couldn't even get the Canadian Society, when I was a more regular part of it, to have student presenters or first-time conference presenter awards or any of those sorts of things. And I've brought lots of my students here to present over the years when I have points. And sometimes, they're very close to winning those things, and they find that really exciting. And they're happy to come, too. They feel a bit more engaged.